Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is the first video in my HR series. This idea was brought to my attention by Aki Marie. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but they left this idea on my community post that I had up for HR, and I thought it was a great idea, so I decided to implement it on my channel. And the first video for this HR series is all about recruiting, and I wrote everything down in my little notebook so I wouldn't ramble on for years because I could. But without further ado, we are just going to jump right in. First thing is first, what is a recruiter? So a recruiter is in charge of filling open positions within a company. The team of recruiters honestly depends on the size of the company. Obviously, for smaller companies, you'll have maybe 1 or 2 recruiters, and for a larger company, you'll have 5 or more. Oftentimes, there are 2 types of recruiters. So you have your regular recruiter, and then you have your full desk recruiter. So a regular recruiter oftentimes gets paid less than a full desk recruiter because they do less within a company. In a normal recruiter role, you really don't do much except for screen, phone interview, and then send to the hiring manager, and then you repeat the whole process all over again. A full desk recruiter actually handles the whole recruiting and hiring process. I wanted to be as specific as possible in this video and kind of walk you guys through the whole hiring process, even if you're not familiar with HR. So the first thing that a full desk recruiter will do is that they will create a job requisition. And what this essentially means is that they'll create a job code for the job opening. They'll work with the hiring manager to create the job description. And once the job description and the job rec is created, typically it will get reviewed by the legal department if it has not ever gotten reviewed by the legal department. But sometimes when it's a position that has been filled in the past, it doesn't really have to go through the legal department again. But if it's a brand new job opening, never ever hired before within the company, it does have to go through the legal department just to make sure that the wording is completely legal, that they're not breaking any laws or anything like that. But once that is ready, the recruiter will then post it on job sites like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn to get people to apply to the job essentially. Once a job posting is on a site like Indeed, typically a lot of applicants would apply, but sometimes even though there's a lot of applicants applying to that job role, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are qualified candidates. And sometimes, depending on the job market or on the role itself, you may not have a lot of applicants applying to that job role. So as a full desk recruiter, you will have to go onto sites like Indeed, on sites like LinkedIn, to reach out to candidates who may be qualified for that role. So a lot of it can sometimes involve cold calling old applicants for other roles, sometimes cold calling people on LinkedIn once you have established that relationship with that person. And then once you find a qualified applicant, you will have a phone interview with them, and 9 out of 10 times you will also have a in-person interview with them. Now this may be different now with the world we are currently living in. I don't know how that's working right now. I'm pretty sure everything is done by Zoom, but either way, you will have a interview with the applicant before they meet with the hiring manager, just to make sure that they meet all the requirements of the role. If they do meet all the requirements, then you'll send them to the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager will have a interview with them. If the hiring manager thinks they're great and they're perfect for the role that they need filled, you will then start the offer process. So you will extend an offer to the candidate, and sometimes this means that you'll have to negotiate a salary with the candidate. This is probably my least favorite part of the recruiter role, just because sometimes the candidate wants more money and the HR department can't give them any more money. And I want to make it clear here that 9 out of 10 times the HR department is not the department that is setting the salary. It's oftentimes the board of the company that sets the salary. Oftentimes, for a very large company, there is a compensation department, and they work alongside the board of the company to come up with salary expectations for every role in that company. And oftentimes I find that people think HR creates the budgets and creates the salaries, but that is not the case unless it's a role within the HR department itself, like you're hiring for another recruiter role or you're hiring for a director of HR. We don't set the budget standards and we don't set the salaries. We are honestly just the middleman. So we deliver the salary that we can afford to the candidate, and that's it. Sometimes we can't even negotiate. So if there's a set salary for a certain role, sometimes we can't increase, we can't go up. And unfortunately, sometimes we do lose candidates because they can't take the salary that we are offering. And it does suck, but that's honestly just the way it works. So before you get angry at HR for offering you a crappy salary, just know that 9 out of 10 times is not us setting that salary. It's the board of the company alongside the compensation department. But if all goes well and the candidate has accepted the job offer, you will initiate the paperwork and work alongside typically an HR coordinator to onboard the new hire for the company. And this can definitely vary depending on the size of your company, but for example, my last role in HR was for a very large hospital here in Boston, and each recruiter had a HR coordinator assigned to them. So we would work alongside each other to onboard the new hire. And depending on whether or not you do have an HR coordinator, they oftentimes take over the tedious part of paperwork, but you do have to get that paperwork started, and you then hand it off to the HR coordinator to finish. And they'll reach out to the candidate for background checks and things like that. But if you don't have an HR coordinator and it's only just a recruiting department, then you typically handle the whole paperwork process, the whole onboarding, the whole background checks, things like that. And oftentimes for certain companies, your recruiting role doesn't end at the onboarding process. Sometimes you oversee transfers, sometimes you oversee terminations as well. And honestly, again, depends on the size of the company. So just bring up these questions in the interview process. But if they don't go into great detail on what they expect from you, that is typically a red flag. So definitely if they don't go into detail, just ask questions yourself and really pinpoint exactly what they expect from you on a day-to-day basis if you were to be hired as a recruiter for that company. Salary expectations. So this is a very important one. Obviously, if you're interested in recruiting, you want to know if recruiting pays well. And the short answer is yes. Recruiting does have the potential to pay very, very well. It honestly will depend on how large your role is within a company. So for a normal recruiter that doesn't really handle onboarding, that doesn't handle salary negotiation, salaries are going to be on the lower end. I did look up the national average salary for a recruiter, and according to ZipRecruiter, the national average for a recruiter is $44,522. Honestly, the salary will depend on a number of factors, such as your years of experience, where you live, and on the company size. I currently live in Boston, and my whole HR career has been in Boston, specifically in the healthcare industry. And within my 5th year of working in HR, I was making very close to 6 figures. So it's honestly a great career to make money. However, if you have no experience, just be prepared to start at the lower end and make a crappy salary for your first couple of years. And then once you've gained experience and have experience to bring to the table, you can definitely ask for higher salaries. Typically for recruiters, there are 2 different types of salaries. So you have your regular annual salary, where it doesn't really change unless you get a pay raise. And for my whole HR career, I've always had a annual salary. Yes, I've had opportunities to make bonuses depending on how many hires I've made, but regardless of the fact, my annual salary really didn't change depending on how many hires I had that year or how many hires I didn't have. It really didn't change, and I am more comfortable with having a steadied annual salary versus having a commission-based salary. I don't really do well with commissions. I don't understand fully the whole commission process, the whole commission idea, and I really don't like it. So whenever I see a role that is commission based, I run the other way. That is just my personal preference. I do know a lot of people who love the idea of a commission based salary just because there is a unlimited potential of earnings for them. And typically commission based recruiters are in contract agencies or temp agencies where they get bonuses for placing hires within a certain company, and depending how long that person stays within that company, their commission goes higher and higher. But oftentimes there are slow periods within HR, and there are certain job roles that are very difficult to fill. And if you don't meet a company's quota, then the base salary tends to be very crappy. Like, I've once went on an interview with a company that was offering me 6 figures as a commission-based salary. So they said I had the potential to make about 125 grand a year if I met like certain hire quotas, certain offer quotas and things like that. But if I didn't meet their quota, then I would have a base salary of 50 grand. Keep in mind that in my last role in a Boston hospital, I was making close to 6 figures without having a commission. So if I didn't meet the commission quota for the job that I went on an interview for, I would just make 50 grand a year. And for me, that is just not doable living in Boston, wanting to start a family. So obviously I turned the job down, even though I had the potential of making way more with commission. It's just not something that I personally like, and I just don't like not having a steady paycheck or a steady salary. It just comes down to personal preference. Education qualifications. So I often get questions on what are the education requirements for a recruiter, and simply put, 9 out of 10 times companies are requiring a bachelor's degree. So I did Google this, and the first thing that popped up was that normally a recruiter role requires a bachelor's degree in human resources, and this is not actually the case. I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I have done very well in the HR field. So I would honestly say that as long as you have a bachelor's degree that has to do with communicating, that has to do with people's behavior or just people in general, then you are in good standing to start your HR career. So whether it's a bachelor's in human resources, bachelor's in psychology, sociology, whatever it is, business, you do have the potential to start your HR career. Now, if your degree is in art or is in music or something very specific that has nothing to do with HR, you will have a harder time getting your foot in the door for a HR company, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen. It will just be a lot harder. And the same applies to if you don't have a bachelor's degree. I've had coworkers in the past that didn't have a bachelor's degree, but they worked their way up within a company, and it took them a lot longer, but they were able to get their foot in the door within a HR department. However, your salaries will tend to be lower, and you may have to work for a nonprofit company or a startup company to get your foot in the door. It's very difficult, but it's doable. All right, now let's talk about the pros and cons. As I mentioned, I have worked as a recruiter before, so a lot of the pros and cons that I wrote down comes from personal experience, and I wanted to include pros and cons just so you guys get the full picture of what it means to be a recruiter. All right, so some of the pros are it's fairly easy to be a recruiter. You do have to be comfortable talking to a lot of different people from all walks of life, but the main duties of recruiting is not difficult. You're not building an airplane, you're not, I don't know, saving a life. So it is easy. I don't want to undermine the role of a recruiter because it is important. Every company needs a recruiter. You obviously need to hire people, so you do need a recruiter, but it's not a difficult job. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, the salary is great. You don't really work weekends. It's typically a Monday to Friday schedule, 9 to 5. I oftentimes have worked earlier than 9 to 5, so I typically like to be in the office by 7:30, so I get to leave at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. As I mentioned, you get to meet so many different types of people, and you get to make a difference because you are in charge of giving someone their first opportunity within a industry, or you are just giving them a job. Especially during these hard financial times, a lot of people are without a job, so you are giving them a chance to provide for their family, and it does warm your heart that you're making a difference. And whenever someone sends you a thank you letter or meets you in person and tells you thank you for taking a chance on me, it does make you feel good, and you can see that you are making a difference. Specifically with me, I recruited for the healthcare industry, so I knew that the person that I hired, whether it was a nurse or it was a CNA, I knew that I was hiring someone that would take care of an individual that was unwell or that was sick. So I wanted to make sure that I hired the person that was not only the most qualified, but also had a heart and that wasn't in it just for the money and that actually cared about their patients. And I knew I was making a difference by hiring someone who was perfect for that role in every way possible. As a recruiter, you are also building your professional network, especially when you attend job fairs. Loud as plain. You get to meet people from other companies and you get to have conversations with them. And if you ever want to leave your current company, you already know what's out there, who works for what company, and you can reach out to them personally and say, hey, is there an opening in your company? I would love to go work for you guys, things like that. So it's kind of an advantage that you have compared to other work professionals. Some of the cons include, but are not limited to, sometimes, depending on the company that you work for, the hours can be long. I've worked for companies where I felt like I was getting burned out because I was working long hours. I really didn't feel like I had time for myself. I didn't have a work-life balance. So that's why it's very important when you go on interviews to really ask the person that's interviewing you, like, what are the expectations? Are you expected to do overtime? Are you expected to take calls on the weekends? Very important to ask these questions so you know what you're getting yourself into. Make it clear that a work-life balance is very important to you. Another con is that you're dealing with a lot of pressure. And what I mean by this is that oftentimes you will have to hire for a leadership role or an exec role or a role that's very essential to the company's well-being. And oftentimes if you can't fill that role or you're having trouble filling that role, you do have to explain to higher ups why exactly you're having issues with that role. And they will expect like progress reports. You will have to meet with board executives depending on the size of the company, things like that. And oftentimes as a recruiter, you may have anywhere from 50 job openings that you have to fill up to 100, 120. Sometimes if it's a really crappy company or you're short staffed, you can even have more than 100 roles to fill. And every role may have a different hiring manager, but every hiring manager for those roles will think that their role is the most important one to fill. And you should ignore all the other job openings because they are the most important one and you should focus all your attention on filling that role. So if you have 20 different hiring managers, each and every one of them will think that their role is most important. So you do have to navigate those tricky corporate waters and just explain to everyone that you're very busy, that you have so many different job openings that you have to fill. And 8 out of 10 times, most people do understand. Even though it's easy, it doesn't come without stress and it doesn't come without pressure. Another con is that it can become quite tedious to be a recruiter. Oftentimes, you are doing the same thing every single day. So if you are someone who gets bored quite easily, then recruiting might not be for you. Again, you may be hiring for different roles, but essentially the process is the same. So if you crave adventure, if you crave to get out the office more and things like that, then recruiting is definitely not for you because 9 out of 10 times, unless you're in a job fair, unless you're at a college recruiting or in a meeting, you are typically in your office recruiting and interviewing. So it can get very tedious and very boring quickly, but if you love meeting new people, if you love chatting, then recruiting is for you. So that's pretty much it for today's video. I really hope you guys have a better understanding of the recruiter role within HR. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer each and every one of you guys. And if you want to see more HR videos from me, definitely hit that subscribe button down below. I don't only do HR videos, I do routines, I do vlogs, I do hauls, all that good stuff. So if that is something that you're interested in, definitely subscribe. I would love to have you a part of my little community. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.